Max told me about it on our third date. We were walking in the park when I tried to hold his hand. He pulled away and looked at me with a serious expression. "There's something you need to know," he said. I braced myself. Here it comes. I'm not ready for a relationship. Nothing to do with you, of course. It was the absolute last thing that I wanted to hear because I was already crazy about him. "Okay," I said. "There's something else. Once a day, usually in the evening, I have to change into my true form for an hour. If I don't, I'll become very sick. During this time, you must never ever look at me. Never. Do you understand?" Yes, got it. Don't ask about it. Don't look at your true form." When he came back from the woods, I was still there. I looked at his face. He smiled, and I was in love. I never told anybody about Max's true form. It's not that he asked me not to. I just didn't think it was anybody's business. Except once, I did tell somebody. It was during my bachelor party. We had rented several cabins in the mountains and spent the night drinking and smoking things we shouldn't have been smoking. Everyone else had passed out and the sun was creeping up behind us as I stood on the cliff with my friend Alex, looking down on the valley below. Alex was my best friend, as close to a brother as I'd known. We'd grown up together and visited each other at college often, and spent the summers together. After college, we'd moved to different cities, but we stayed in close contact. Standing there on the cliff, I told Alex about Max's true form. At first, he thought I was joking. Then he had 1,000 questions, most of which I couldn't answer. Alex was in town for business last week and planned on spending the weekend at our house. The conversation at the cliff had happened 4 years ago, and we hadn't spoken about Max's true form since, despite keeping in close contact and seeing each other as often as two people transforming into adults in different parts of the country can. It happened on Saturday evening. We were lounging lazily in the backyard, deep into the beer, having just finished with some grilled steaks when I got a text from work. "God damn it," I groaned. "I have to make a work call." "Seriously?" said Max, raising an eyebrow. "On a Saturday night? My biggest client, babe. Sorry." "It is what it is, I guess," said Max. "I'm going to head inside and get cleaned up. Alex, are you okay just hanging out for a bit?" Alex smiled. "I'll be fine. Got my beer, got some weeds to pull in your garden. God knows your lazy-ass husband isn't going to do it. Those tomatoes are choking to death. It's a tragedy." I rolled my eyes and went into the side yard to make my call. 15 minutes into it, I heard the screams coming from inside. Both my best friend and my husband were wailing in terror. I dropped the phone and ran into the house and down the hall to our bedroom. Through the open door, I could see that the door to the secluded room was also standing open. "Don't come in!" screamed Max. "I'm in my true form. Call an ambulance." He looked. Oh God, he looked. He sounded desperate and truly horrified. That made me desperate and horrified, and I wanted to rush into the room, but I knew suddenly that that would be a mistake. I knew suddenly that Max didn't want me to look at his true form, not out of a sense of vanity, but for my own safety. Alex staggered backwards out of the room. He was holding a straightened-out paperclip, which he had used to pick the privacy lock. Now he was stabbing it again and again into his eyes, shouting gibberish. He was clearly in the depths of madness, and it turned my stomach to see him mutilate himself. "Call a fucking ambulance," my husband screamed. "Don't come in here. He fucking looked." I turned and ran back to the side yard, where my phone was lying in the newly mowed grass. My client was still on the line, alarmed, asking what was happening, what all the screaming was. I hung up on him and called 911. When the paramedics arrived, Alex was having a seizure in the hallway. Max was stroking his head, sobbing. He had returned to his human form, but everything looked a little off. My world has been dark this past week. My best friend is in a psychiatric hospital under suicide watch. He's completely blind and mostly catatonic, except when he slips into a violent babbling mania. The doctors are optimistic that his state is temporary, but they don't know the truth about what caused it, because I told the paramedics that Alex had taken a large dose of psychedelic drugs and fallen into psychosis. I saw no good reason to tell the truth about what had happened. Who would believe that one look at my husband's true form would make somebody insane? At best, we would be the subjects of a long investigation. At worst, we would have to prove that what we were saying was true by showing somebody Max's true form. Then the same thing would happen again, and what after that? I had no idea, and no interest in finding out. For Max's part, I knew that he would never consent to show anybody his true form, no matter what the consequences of refusal were. I did get a follow-up call from the police asking me to confirm my story. The hospital found no traces of psychedelics in Alex's blood, though that's not unheard of since they have a short half-life. If they end up testing his hair, I will likely be in a lot of trouble. But that's truly the least of my concerns. Max is in a state of his own. He still changes into his true form, though not as regularly. And when he changes back, everything looks slightly off. It is beginning to affect his health, and I can see the toll it's taking on him. I've tried to assure him that it wasn't his fault. He knew, I said. I told him that nobody was ever allowed to look at it. He knew, and then he broke into the room. This is not on you, baby. Please, talk to me. Not on me? That one look at my true form makes people insane. Please. I just need some time alone. As for me, I am doing my best to hold it together. Do you know what's strange, though? Despite what happened to Alex, I still find myself curious about what my husband's true form looks like. More curious than ever, really. Max has taken to spending more time in his true form lately. He says it's the only way to keep himself stable. But every time he changes back, it seems like he's becoming less and less human. It worries me, but I don't know what to do. One evening, as Max was preparing to change, I found myself standing outside the door to the secluded room. My heart pounded in my chest as I considered what I was about to do. I had promised never to look, but the curiosity was eating me alive. I took a deep breath and turned the doorknob, opening the door just a crack. Through the small gap, I saw something shifting, something not quite human. The sight was mesmerizing, and I felt an overwhelming urge to push the door open wider. But then I remembered Alex, my best friend, now blind and in a psychiatric hospital because he had looked. I quickly shut the door and backed away, my heart still racing. Max came out an hour later, his human form looking more haggard than ever. He glanced at me, suspicion in his eyes. "Did you?" "No," I said quickly. "I didn't." He sighed, relieved. "Thank you. You don't know what it means to me that you respect my boundaries." But I did know, and it was tearing me apart. One night, after a particularly bad episode where Max had to stay in his true form for almost the entire night, he came to me with a look of resolve on his face. "I can't keep doing this," he said. "It's destroying me, and it's destroying us. Maybe it's time you knew the truth." I stared at him, unsure of what to say. "Are you sure?" He nodded. "Yes. If we're going to make this work, you need to know. But you have to promise me one thing. No matter what you see, you'll remember that I'm still me. I promise," I whispered, my heart pounding. Max led me to the secluded room and closed the door behind us. He took a deep breath and began to change. The process was slow, agonizing, and I watched in a mix of horror and fascination as his human form melted away, revealing something otherworldly, something I couldn't even begin to describe. It was terrifying, but in that moment, I remembered his words. He was still Max, the man I loved, and I realized that it didn't matter what he looked like. What mattered was who he was. When the transformation was complete, Max looked at me with eyes that were both familiar and alien. "This is me," he said, his voice trembling. I stepped forward and took his hand. "I love you," I said, "no matter what." The next morning, Max changed back into his human form. It was easier this time, and when he was done, he looked more like himself than he had in months. There was a sense of relief between us, a weight that had been lifted. The curiosity was gone. I had seen his true form, and while it was terrifying, it hadn't driven me insane. I had faced my fear, and in doing so, I had found a deeper connection with Max. Our relationship grew stronger after that. Max still had to change every evening, but it was different now. There was no more secrecy, no more fear of the unknown. We faced it together, and that made all the difference. And as for Alex, he began to show signs of improvement. The doctors were baffled, but I knew it was because the secret was no longer a burden I carried alone. I visited him often, sharing stories of my life with Max, hoping that one day he would recover fully. Life was still complicated, but we faced it together, one day at a time, and that was enough. In the end, the truth about Max's true form brought us closer, strengthening our bond and allowing us to face the challenges of life together. The fear of the unknown had been replaced by acceptance and love, and that was all that mattered. As we walked through life hand in hand, I knew that no matter what obstacles came our way, we would face them together, unafraid and unbroken.